Okay, managerial communication students, today we're going to be talking about how we communicate based not on what we say, but on how we conduct ourselves. We're going to be talking about the importance of nonverbal communication, even in our online world. And maybe even in our online world, this is even more important now in terms of how we emote, how we convey enthusiasm, how we get people to buy into what we're talking about. So our agenda for today. We're going to be talking first about how to deliver your content non-verbally. In other words, how do we convey enthusiasm? How do we convey passion? How do we get people interested in what we have to say? Then we're going to talk about how we get ready to present. Nobody, as it seems, likes public speaking that much, and it can be very nerve-wracking. So how do we get in the zone to be able to get ready to do this presentation, or do a presentation, I should say? And how do we get people to also feel that their time is being well used as well? So we're talking about listening skills. It's important also to make people feel listened to and to make good use of their time in the ways in which we approach those folks. Sometimes it's not what you say at all. It's how you listen that ultimately seals the deal in the world of business. So let's talk about this a little bit. Why do we talk about nonverbal communications in the first place? Again, this goes back to the early 70s, a book called Silent Messages. And it was a book for salespeople. And by the estimates of the author, it basically came out that over half of what you were communicating came from your body language. Another about 40% came from tone. And about 7% came from what you actually said. Now, this is a book from the early 70s. And there is some doubt in terms of whether or not these numbers hold up. That being said, especially after the last year of pandemic, I think there is some wisdom into considering the ways in which we convey ourselves in person and via video, because we're dealing with mediums which often can be flat and cannot be as accurate as in person in terms of conveying what we're trying to get across non-verbally. That's why we talk about this stuff. So again, some context on those numbers. Enthusiasm does a lot, but your content is still important. As it goes in the old expression, content is king. What you leave behind, if you've got handouts or digital copy or information that somebody's going to consume later after meeting you, after having absorbed you as a person, that stuff is going to be put in context with what you presented to them. In other words, who you presented them with, the impression they have of you will frame the way they look at the content that you leave behind in documents. So you've got to have both. You got to have quality content and a good presentation. Just like anything else, your beginning is your chance to make your first impression, and your ending of your presentation is your opportunity to be able to wrap it up and tie it all back together. How you represent yourself is your credibility in the mind of the person you are speaking to, or the persons you're speaking to. And when I say you are the message, we dress for the occasion. We present ourselves for the occasion. So we are the faces of our organizations when we do these presentations. So let's get into some of these skills that are required if we want to inform or persuade. So things to think about. Our posture says a lot about us. We've all heard the expression, oh yeah, he's a stand-up guy, she's a stand-up girl. We have in the West the idea that people who stand up straight are people who are more trustworthy, more strong. Body movement conveys enthusiasm. If I speak with my hands, I gesture, for example, those are things that can say, I care about what I'm talking about. I'm excited. If I pace the room, for example, teachers who move around more tend to get better evaluations from their students for in-person classes because they seem to be into what they're doing and they work the room. Facial expressions. Is somebody looking lively? Are they looking like they're really excited to be there or not? And finally, eye contact. And again, in Western culture, we distrust people who will not lock eyes with us. Eye contact is very important. It implies credibility, trustworthiness, and also gives people a chance to say, he looked me straight in the eye and told me the truth. So that's important stuff in our culture. Other things, even though these are ways that we are speaking, it's not the content. What we are saying is important, but how we say it is important as well. Your intonation. Are you speaking up and down? Are you making a variety of sounds when you speak, like I just did there from an extreme point? It's just the same reason, for example, why a melody in a song is more appealing than a monotone. It sticks in our head. volume. I'm not suggesting you should be like Billy Mays on the old commercials and yell at people, but high levels of volume do tend to imply enthusiasm. I do encourage instructors and good presenters to use their outdoor voice. Rate. This is a tricky one. If you speak quickly, like I tend to do, sometimes you can overwhelm your audience with too much content. But a fast rate also can imply enthusiasm. So that's a balancing act. Then we get into fillers. If you have anybody who says like, you know, or what message does that send to the audience? It sends the message that we're tentative, that we don't know what we're talking about. And in reality, it is kind of a defense mechanism that we use to buy ourselves additional time to think. So it can be a very empowering thing to get past that stuff. It can be a very enlightening thing to record ourselves presenting just to see how much that we do it. If you're one of those folks who says I'm a lot, you can work on it. You can break yourself of that bad habit. It can be done. And finally, enunciation. People who say their words together like this tend to bowl over people. Where people who enunciate make it easier for their audiences to consume content, number one. And number two, it makes it easier for them to pay attention. So good enunciation also implies credibility. So in terms of other ways, a nonverbal skill that's maybe a little tougher to do is to be authentic. And what I mean by that is that you bring yourself to the presentation. If you're an informal person who has a good sense of humor and the environment allows for it, then bring some humor into the presentation. Be yourself up there. Be who you really are. Let people connect with who you are. Number one, it makes the presentation better. Number two, it makes you more relatable. So the audience can emotionally connect with you if they see you're enthusiastic and you care about a subject. That person really is into communications. I hope they're saying of me when they hear my lectures. Physically, if you're moving around and working the room, it sends a message that you're inclusive. It also sends the message that you're excited about the content. I like to refer to it as the Oprah approach. And Oprah Winfrey, the richest, as far as I know, the richest woman in the United States, was very successful as somebody who could interview people because she would take the time to learn who they were and connect with them on their level. So whether or not you're a fan of Oprah Winfrey, she's a great interviewer and you can learn from her. And finally, the topic. People can spot a fake a mile off. And I encourage you to avoid doing presentations on topics that you don't care about or don't want to learn about. Why? Because the audience will pick up on it. You can't be authentic about something that you really don't believe in. So what about other things in terms of how we manage our space? Well, seating is a big one. If we are seated around a table, where you sit sends a message. This is a really kind of strange example, but let's say, for example, you're trying to make a sales call. You're trying to seal the deal. You get into a room and you're the first person to get there. The question is, where do you sit? And the second question is, if you're trying to sell to a CEO or a manager, you probably want to make sure that your chair isn't higher than theirs. That is a subliminal message that we are superior, and it's something that a lot of people don't think about. So objects in the room. Anytime you can clear things away from you and the other person. Get rid of barriers, for example. I run into this all the time when I teach. I like to walk when I teach. And if there's a table in the middle of the room, it really hinders me sometimes. And again, the way we dress sends specific messages. For example, if I show up for a meeting with you and I've got a blue suit on, a white shirt, and a conservative tie, versus if I've got an unbuttoned top button on my collar, no tie, and sleeves rolled up, I'm sending two different messages to you. If I'm coming in to try to encourage you to work with me and give me your best effort, the shirt sleeves might be the better message. All of these things affect how we interact with people in a nonverbal way. So where should you sit? This is an age-old question. You're the first person who shows up for a meeting. Where should you sit at the table? There is no one right answer to this question. If you show up late, that's a bad move because you're going to be stuck on one of the seats on the outside of the meeting, probably not even at the table. You've positioned yourself as a non-participant. If you're sitting at the head of the table, if you're the boss, great. You can be that guy or girl who is running the meeting. If the boss is sitting at one end and you're sitting at the other, you've positioned yourself to be the person who is going up against them. If you're one of the boss's allies, for example, you might want to sit to the left or right of him or her. People who sit in the middle of the conference table, for example, tend to be more open. That's the message that we're sending. So you got to decide why you're sitting where you're sitting. So what's your purpose? If your purpose is to be confrontational and to establish power, that seat at the head of the table might be great for you. If your purpose is to present and you've got high credibility, that seat at the high table, or the high seat at the end of the table, may be for you as well. If you're establishing that you're an ally of the boss, sitting to their right or left might be a great way to establish your credibility and your rank. Your organization's culture. For example, I work in an academic culture where maybe these rules are not as hard and fast as they are in business. Sometimes it's logistics. When did you get to the meeting? And finally, how much nerve do you have? Do you have the nerve to be that person sitting at the end of the table? So we talked about some of the ways in which we position ourselves, use objects, and even use inflection. Let's talk about how we get in the zone. How do we relax prior to being in front of people or interacting with folks? I think the best way to be relaxed for a meeting is to practice and to know your stuff. If you know your material inside and out, you know what your mission is in that meeting, you know what it is you're trying to convince someone of or what you're trying to sell them, you can immediately be a little bit more relaxed. So I think it's always great to get used to doing a few of these things. Speaking conversationally. Again, we covered this in previous chapters, but can you speak conversationally about the topic that you're going to be taking on? So if you know your topic inside and out, you can use common speech. Relax. You know your material. It's something that a lot of people don't talk about, but the first week back after summer break, when I'm teaching full time, my voice gets tired because I haven't been speaking to a room for 4 or 5 hours a day at full volume. It can really wear you out. I also encourage you, again, I'm not a big fan of rote memorization, the idea of actually memorizing things verbatim. Why? Because I think it's disingenuous. It's not spontaneous. Know your key points. Don't memorize the entire speech or even sections of it. Be ready in your speech or presentation to be a little spontaneous. Again, the parts that matter the most are the introduction and closing. So know how you're going to make good use of those. If you're using visuals, if you're using PowerPoint or videos, test them before you get there. Make sure you're comfortable and that they work. By the way, here's a note on PowerPoint. Again, use standard fonts and colors. Try to know what you're walking into. If you know it's a hostile meeting, do some role play with somebody about some of the hard questions you're going to be asked and how you're going to keep your composure. And again, if you got a really important presentation with limited time, time it. And generally speaking, most people put more content in than will fit. We err on the side of caution, and as a result, we usually have too much content. So time yourself before you get in that room. How can you get prepared? I think when I'm doing an in-person presentation, I like to get there about 20 minutes early. Now, if you're doing an online presentation, as we've discussed, sometimes it can be awkward if you're there more than 5 minutes early, but 20 minutes early is great. You can check the room. You can make sure all your stuff is working. You can make sure that if your visuals need adjusted, they can. And if you're all set and ready to go, step out in the hallway, have something to drink or get some fresh air, relax for a minute. And again, I love 90s music and always listen to Ice Cube. Check yourself before you wreck yourself when you get into these kinds of presentations. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Sometimes even stretching could be good. I know this sounds a little new agey, but stretching, taking a walk, if you have an opportunity before a big presentation to get a workout in or something that gets rid of that nervous energy, it will help. So exercise is great. The high power pose, we call it the Superman pose. I'm not kidding about this. If I've got a super important meeting, yeah, I will go find a private place and I'll put my hands on my hips and get that power stance going. There's also something called the 60 minutes meditation. And I'm dead serious about this. It's like giving your brain a tiny nap. If you can sit with your hands on your knees in a private place and tap out the pace of a 60-second clock. So it's a pace that goes something like this. You do that while you're doing controlled breathing, literally for a couple minutes, and you'll be refreshed. It stirs the brain into almost having like a REM sleep kind of state. Also, think about the parts you're going to be using during this presentation. Your neck is going to be tired because you're talking a lot. If it's that kind of a meeting, if you're doing most of the presenting. So think about those areas. Don't overexert yourself. Stretch your shoulders, arms, all that stuff. Even if you do some vocal exercises, I put that on there. I'm serious about this. Freddie Mercury, the guy who was the lead singer for Queen, one of the greatest rock and roll singers ever, his warm-ups were legendary, and he would get into this operatic tone and he'd be ready for it. If you got time to prep before the meeting, if you got a big meeting tomorrow, get sleep, get a hot shower, make sure it clears out your sinuses, for example. Try to make sure that you're well hydrated, and warm beverages are good, coffee or tea. I will never, if it's possible, show up for a presentation, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, without something to drink. Why? Our mouths get dry, our throats get tired. Don't show up for a presentation. It's a very acceptable thing in almost all scenarios at this point in time to have a coffee or a water bottle or something to hydrate with, and people will cut you slack for taking a drink in the middle of your presentation if you'll keep your voice together. In terms of mental relaxation, think about these things too. It can be very stressful. I know, for example, just letting you in on instructor speak, the first presentation of the semester to a new crop of students is very stressful. Why? You got one chance to make a really good first impression on people you're going to be spending an entire semester with and who are trusting you. It can be very stressful. So try to think about these things. Try to think positively. After all, you got asked here for a reason. Think non-judgmentally. Try to be objective about your content. Yeah, I know this stuff better than anybody else in this room. Be rational about it. Nobody, in most circumstances, who's come to your presentation is out to get you. They're there for a reason. Think about that stuff. Clear your mind. If you get a chance, I know that whenever I come in and set up for a class, for about 5 minutes before I start lecturing, I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to be in my own space. If I've got a goal in mind, I'll visualize what I hope to accomplish at the end of the presentation. It's good to set goals. Connect with your audience. If you have a chance at the beginning of a presentation for some small talk, not too much, you don't want to get distracted, but connect with them. If you find something they're interested in. For example, I am here in western central Pennsylvania, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are the biggest thing around. So if it's fall, yeah, I might ask people if they watch the game this weekend. It's a way to have an icebreaker. And I know that is technically a verbal thing, but it's not part of the actual presentation. Find your fight song. And what I mean by that, literally, there are certain songs, music's powerful. I mean, Friedrich Nietzsche once said that life without music would be a mistake. I agree with that 200%. And there are certain songs that make me feel inspired or powerful. And if I'm driving to a presentation, you bet your bottom dollar I will listen to one of those songs on the way to the presentation to get me psyched up. Same reason that sports teams listen to their music to get them pumped up. Do that as your presenter as well. While you're presenting, if you can, move around. Let your body let its energy go. Drink something and remember to breathe. If you feel that you're talking too fast, you're definitely talking too fast. Generally speaking, most of us talk too fast when we present. So take a breath, slow down, try to get it together. So if you have other things that are concerning you during a presentation, it could be a tough presentation. If there are people you notice that are nodding with you, that are giving you acknowledgement, that, wow, I like what you're talking about, work that part of the room. If you do something or make a joke that plays well, again, this is more of a strategy than specific verbal presentation technique. Go with what goes well. If you can see that people agree with you, try to find a few folks in each part of the room and build your allies, even if they're people that you don't know. And don't forget those folks who came in late or in the back. Yeah, it's just like church. People come in and they sneak in the back to get the bad seats in the back, but include them. Doesn't mean put them on the spot. Make sure you're making eye contact with them. If you can move, go to their place in the room as well. Some things to think about. You are there for a reason. If you got invited to speak, people have already assigned you some credibility. So if they've already given you some credibility, give yourself some cred. Feel good. You're there for a reason. We are our own worst critics. We will pick ourselves apart more than anybody else does. I like to think about it this way. We can sometimes get derailed. For example, even in these recordings, I occasionally will have a flub because I'm a human being. I'm not a machine. I'm not perfect. Think about watching a YouTube video. Sometimes we'll be on limited bandwidth, and all of a sudden the frame will freeze, and for a second or a fraction of a second, the video is frozen, and then it comes back and we forget all about it. That's like a flub in a presentation. Unless you do something really, really terrible, like I don't know, hit an audience member or really insult somebody, things get let go. And it's okay not to know absolutely everything. None of us are experts at everything. So give yourself that permission that, yeah, not everything's going to be perfect. Now, there are some organizational cultures that are more demanding, but generally speaking, we're a little more casual these days. So we talked about how to deliver. We talked about how to relax. Now let's talk about how to be a powerful listener. So listening sometimes is what actually makes the sale. You can have a great conversation. You can have a great presentation. Your visuals are fantastic. Your ability to make eye contact and listen to somebody sometimes will be the most important part of your presentation. So sometimes what you don't do, which is don't interrupt, don't talk, and what you do non-verbally might be just as important as what you do verbally, especially when it comes to listening. So it's showing courtesy to a speaker. If you're a multi-presenter bill, for example, there's lots of people presenting. Making eye contact, being attentive, not being on your phone when somebody else is presenting leaves a positive impression onto somebody as well. You could build credibility within your own organization if you're hanging on every word the boss is saying, for example. You score on points when you pay attention. The boss notices when you're checking your email on your laptop versus when you're making eye contact with him or her. And if you're stuck in that room for a presentation or a meeting, and goodness knows we all are in too many meetings, if you're stuck there anyway, you might as well pay attention because you might learn something. So how do we convince people that we're listening? Physically leaning in, for example, nodding your head, being comfortable. If you're wide open staring at somebody bolt upright, that maybe is a little too stalkerish. Don't be that rigid. If you cross your arms, for example, lean back in your seat, even though you might not mean to send this message, you could be confrontational. Be comfortable. Occasionally make eye contact. Nod when you agree with something. And even the idea of resting your head on your hands and thinking, like the old thinking expression, anything that shows that we are attending to the speaker can score points for us. If you get into eye contact, too little shows you don't care. If you're staring somebody down, you're trying to intimidate them. And again, occasional eye contact. Avoid staring at your phone the whole time. If we are too close to somebody, let's say, for example, we are sitting at a table during a presentation. If you are uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable. And even for people who are comfortable with close space, in the United States, if you're closer than about 1.5 feet, you're too close. And again, that's a very American standard. We like our space. Try not to sit any higher than the person who's presenting. And if you can avoid getting a chair that makes noises, that's good too. And again, we talked about the idea of eliminating barriers. And I love this practice. I think I mentioned it in class before that there are cultures such as the Japanese culture, which you check into a meeting by putting your phone in a plastic box outside the meeting room. That way it's ensured that you're going to pay attention the whole time you're there. I think people would have a cow if we had to do that in this country. So if you get other people to speak, that also helps and gets your credibility. Not only does it help you get good input, it also shows people that you value their opinion. So encouraging other people to speak is generally really good. Again, open-ended questions as opposed to yes or no. Open-ended questions will spur conversation. And sometimes you got to start with something that's maybe a little more wide open, a little less threatening. Like, I love this question. What do you think about the new design? How do you think we're going to do here? Instead of yes or no types of questions. So other things too, it's good to let people know that you understand them. Again, nodding is always good. Sometimes the idea of paraphrasing or asking somebody to restate something, that's good too. It shows that you're, number one, in for the meeting, and number two, you care about the content and that you care enough to try to get it right. It also helps to take better notes. So paraphrasing content is a good one. Paraphrasing feelings, how does that make you feel? Believe me, we get into conflict or tense situations, it's good to maybe check in on that stuff And if you get a chance to repeat or paraphrase, it makes for better notes ultimately at the end of the meeting. So that is our discussion today about the value of nonverbal communications. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to interacting with you very soon.